Today, I want to talk to you about some of the e-bike rules and regulations that I think are born out of ignorance and a lack of effort to learn about e-bikes and how they actually work. Basically what I'd call stupidity with regard to the powers that be enacting rules and regulations for e-bikes, a subject the powers that be haven't got a clue about. Now, we all know e-bikes are quickly gaining popularity. More and more people than ever are riding them. However, the e-bike popularity explosion has really been a double-edged sword. On the one hand, because e-bikes have become so popular, they've given many more people access to areas that normally they wouldn't have and they wouldn't have been able to visit and enjoy. On the other hand, the trails and roads have become much more congested. This has led to all kinds of trail and road confrontations, which in turn has forced municipalities to try and put more regulations on the trails in the name of safety. Now look, I'm all for safety, but the problem, like usual, is the people making the, quote, new safety regulations, unquote, make the new regulations using the knee-jerk reaction method. They're making all these new regulations with very little and most times no practical knowledge of the subject. And in addition, they're making these safety regulations with no input from the e-bike community. So in essence, they're making all these new safety regulations not based on any kinds of facts, but merely false rumors and bias. Now this summer, I was driving through the mountains close to where I live, and I was checking out some of the campgrounds looking for some new e-bike riding areas. I'd driven through a number of campgrounds, and I didn't see any signs saying anything about the use of e-bikes on the trails. So I decided to stop at the office and pick up a map of all the trails and to ask about e-bike access. In addition to showing all the trails, the maps list all the rules and regulations for hikers, equestrians, and cyclists. Now these maps didn't mention anything about e-bikes, so I asked the person at the desk about e-bike access. I said, e-bikes aren't specifically prohibited in the rule book, so I'm assuming that they're okay to ride on the trails. Now the person at the desk looked at me and actually kind of chuckled and said, "Of course e-bikes are not allowed." And he said this in a way that implied that it was a dumb question. He said, "E-bikes are way too dangerous to be allowed on the trails." Now, when I heard this, I was kind of shocked, and it took me a few seconds to gather myself before I could even answer. I did ask him, though, what made e-bikes too dangerous to ride on the trails. Again, he looked at me with a kind of a bit of disgust and said there's all kinds of reasons why e-bikes are way too dangerous to be on the trails. He said first, e-bikes are way too quiet for the trails. If an animal is on the trail, they won't be able to hear an e-bike coming and will be frightened and forced to bolt at the last second. Then he said, secondly, if the battery dies on an e-bike while they're out on a trail, then the rider will be stranded and have to be rescued by the park's rescue service. Then he said, thirdly, and most importantly, e-bikes will burst into flames at any moment and cause a forest fire. And with all the forest fires burning across the state, we just can't afford to have all kinds of fires started by all these e-bikes. Now, the guy said this with such conviction and confidence because, in his mind, these were indisputable facts that no one could deny. Frankly, I was stunned. I really didn't know how or even if I should respond. The utter lack of knowledge, and yeah, I'll say it, the ignorance regarding e-bikes was shocking. Frankly, I was kind of pissed that regulations like these would be put into place with absolutely no effort to learn about and research e-bikes or even talk with people in the e-biking community before these regulations were put into practice. Now I figured it was pretty useless to try and educate this guy because he was so sure of his information and nothing was going to change his mind. However, I did ask him another question. I said, I understand this is summertime and it's super dry, super hot, and real windy here in California. And I also understand the state is being ravaged by massive wildfires throughout the entire state. So I understand your concern for the wildfires. But I just drove through the campground and saw at least a dozen campers with huge bonfires with flames at least 5 foot tall and burning embers blowing in all directions from the high wind. If you are so concerned about wildfires, why are you even allowing campfires at all? Now this is really what he said. The dude says, well, we have signs saying to be careful with your campfires. Man, are you kidding me? And at that, I just had to leave. And I got to say, I'm sorry. I have to say it. This is just the greatest example of the sheer stupidity of the people making and enforcing our trail regulations. Now, I understand the need for trail regulations, especially with the added congestion e-bikes are bringing to the trails. But, come on, man, let's get real here. Do some research, get some facts, and get some input from the people actually involved before you make some stupid knee-jerk reaction regulations based on pure fantasy. Now, I'd love to hear, what you guys have to say about this.